bottom bar of your Zoom screen. للي حابين يسمعون الحوار باللغة العربية ممكن أنتم تضغطون على الخيار على اختيار اللغة أسفل الشاشة. You are welcome to send through any questions you might have or comments in the Q&A tab below as well throughout the session, and we will try to answer as much of these questions as possible towards the end of our talk. You can also find us on YouTube streaming live on Shuruq's channel, Shuruq SHJ. So make sure you share the link with your friends if Zoom was not an option for them. Modular architecture has been around for decades. However, it is still not the most common method of construction used worldwide, although it offers the chance of speeding up the construction process, cutting down costs, and much more benefits. Nowadays, the trend is picking up, particularly in designing spaces that offer an escape set in the midst of nature in extreme site conditions. And they appeal to many users for its seclusion and unity with nature. So discussing modular architecture, allow me to welcome Willem van Bolderen, partner and architect at Studio Puisto Architects.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. Massimo Gnocchi, am I pronouncing this right?
Gnocchi, actually is gnocchi.
Gnocchi.
Yeah, thank you.
And Dancy Paulo, founders and architects of the Mountain Refuge. Thank you for participating in our talk. If you can briefly introduce yourself and your work, that would be great before we begin. So Willem, maybe we can start with you.
Yes, thanks for asking me to join this talk. It's really interesting to share this info with other people and of course talk with like-minded colleagues. So my name is Willem van Bolderen. I'm one of the founding partners of Studio Puisto Architects. We are an architecture office based in Helsinki, Finland. Our office focuses on hospitality architecture. So we design a lot of hotels, resorts, retreats, spas, etc. And we do that from the master plan to architecture and interior design, so the full service. Next to my work at the office, so I also teach at Aalto University of Technology here in Helsinki, with the focus on timber architecture or architecture in wood, which is related to this topic because building in wood is very suitable for modular construction. We've done quite a few modular projects in different parts of the world, so in Scandinavia, but we are now also building a retreat in Montana in the US, which is also modular.
That's great. We're going to hear more about this later. So Massimo and Paolo?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, hi.
Thank you and thank you for giving us this good opportunity. Hopefully it's going to be a great conversation. Actually, I don't know how to introduce ourselves because we are actually a team. So if you don't mind, Paolo, I'll be speaking about us for a little bit and then you can introduce yourself.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, we're both architects. Me and my partner Paolo met at the Architectural University of Milan, where we studied. And after that, of course, each of one of us took their paths. Paolo went to Japan, for example, Tokyo, actually. And I stayed in Milan. And but we had something in common, which is passion for architecture. And we did some work together before departing our ways. And this work was about modular architecture. So we won a quite important challenge, architectural competition in modular tiny houses. And after that, we have been developing the project, which became really popular. So yeah, that's what we're doing right now, modular architecture on tiny homes.
Great. Thank you. Massimo, before we move to Paolo, maybe if you can raise the voice of your mic, the mic audio, that would be great.
Let's see if I can do that.
I think now it's better. Maybe it was, the mic was just...
Yeah, perhaps I was too far away.
Yeah, now it's perfect. All right. Paolo, sorry.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting us for this session. My name is Paolo, and as Massimo said before, we met in Polytechnic of Milan. And after the university, so we won that competition, and we start this adventure together. I decided to move to Japan 4 years and a half ago. And hopefully with this project, with this idea, with this adventure, I can come back to my country, to Italy. And if everything will go well, maybe we can make I don't know, a studio firm together. So
well, fingers crossed.
Yes.
Great. So just before we dive into the more technical questions, generally, why modular? Why did, I mean, Studio Puisto, you have modular among traditional, you have different kinds of projects that you tackle. So why would you choose modular? And then Massimo and Paolo, you basically, your studio is all about modular. So why did you choose that as a business model?
Sorry, your studio was? I just lost that.
So I was saying how you're based around modular. Sorry. So why choose that as a business model? Why modular architecture?
Well, because basically it's a matter of production. So you actually made a good introduction to modular architecture, and you basically told a lot of it. And we believe that modular architecture is important nowadays because it solves some problems. Solves some problems that weren't there like 50 years ago. But now times are changing, and unfortunately, we're going to need to deal with some issues that are going to present to humanity, say, in future years, future decades. So, based on that, we believe in modular architecture because it can solve problems related to design for everyone and ease of production. So cutting costs, cutting too much use of material, of course. And of course, so this is going to be a sustainable kind of process.
Yeah, I could add to that, because I think there's a few clear advantages to modular construction. And one is, of course, that you can build in a controlled environment, so inside a factory, and you can use tools that would not be available on the construction side. Think of a CNC cutter, 3D printing, things that are not very mobile, but you have in the factory. Of course, one downside for modular construction is that you need bigger elements that need to be transported by road. So accessibility is one thing. Depending of the size of modular. I think the type of modular that we are now discussing here among the three of us, or four of us, is of course spatial models. So basically a complete unit that can be transported. And that's of course limited by the width of the road, the height of bridges, etc. There's another type of modular as well, where we think more of elements, and elements have been around for quite long. They typically only exist out of one material, but you could also think of modular elements that include technology, etc., that would bypass these limits of transportation. So I think we're only in the beginning of modular construction, and the spatial models that we're now discussing, that's a very easy first step into this. But it's going to be interesting how far we can take this and how much can we produce offsite and build skyscrapers out of modular elements, etc.
The main limit to make it really sustainable is transport, as you said, transport. So we believe most part of modular design goes in the design itself. It's very good to design modular homes or modular buildings, modular solutions that actually allow a good range of customization, a good range of design choices. So this is the real challenge behind modular architecture.
Yeah.
Modular architecture, if done well, is really sustainable because you can produce everything in your warehouse and then you go on the client side and you just assemble. It's going to take, if you made a really smart design, it's going to take a few hours. So it's really sustainable this way. But of course, there are some drawbacks. And drawbacks are choice limitations. But we are actually positive, and with our design, we are trying to overcome this challenge, overcome this problem by finding compromises, of course. Because if you go fully modular, of course, you're going to destroy some of the design that makes an architecture and not just a building. But if you go for full design and without taking in consideration the sustainability of the building process, so modularity, etc., then you're gonna make just design. So you're not taking into considerations the environment, the production chain sustainability of materials and construction methods, of course. So we believe everything is in the middle. So finding a good balance between design and sustainability. And yes, you can keep it modular, but you must not destroy, of course, the design that goes into that.
So, Paolo, do you think it's safe to say that the mountain refuge was designed to solve the issue of sustainability? Like, what was the primary problem that you wanted to solve and wanted to tackle when you actually thought of the mountain refuge?
Well, in that case, about our first prototype, our first design for the shelter for this tiny house, the main goal for us it was recreating a space where yes, the sustainability aspect was respected, taking care about issues like transportation rather than materials, but also it was important for us to change the point of view about the architecture. I mean, from our point of view, and this changing, it was about not consider the architecture as an architecture, as a building, but consider the architecture as a product. If we make this this step, we can see that we can try to imagine that the building, the process behind the building, it could be a process that can optimize some optimize the construction chain, and can can go into the direction of the respecting the environment and the sustainability, but also can consider and can control the usage of the land, especially in a country and in a country like Italy or in a continent like Europe. It is really important to understand how much we can build and how we can build, and it is also important to understand how can we save the material after the life of the building. For instance, if we use material that can be reused after the cycle of the life of the building, we can respect the environment 2 times. The first time when we built, and the second time when we disassemble and we reuse the material. And so basically the goal for us, it was this aspect, but also the design issue. And when I speak about the design issue, I mean generating a good space for living, but at the same time try to get to the people a direct relationship between the interior of our shelter, in this case, and the nature outside. So this was our what we had in mind when we designed.
Thank you. I like the idea of architecture as a product and not a building, what you were referring to. I feel like that expands the possibilities even more. On the other side, I wanted, because Willem and I were having a previous conversation before this, and he was saying how modular can be constraining or limited when it comes to housing. So I'd like to know what you think about that, given that the challenge that you guys are referring to is to actually have a level of customization, as Massimo was saying.
Yes,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, you asked before, like, because we design both traditional builds or in between builds and modular construction, and we use this technology, for example, CNC, like modern technologies like CNC 3D printing. We also use in traditional builds. So then we talk more about, for example, CLT elements, etc. But we're, for example, working on an apartment building downtown here in Helsinki, and that's an infill in between 2 other buildings. So with the current set of regulations, a partial traditional build is the way forward at the moment. One problem is, of course, if you think of a spatial model, we are restricted mainly by the width of transport, and with the insulation that is required in for example, a passive building, we are left with, depending a little bit on which country you're building in, but roughly 3 meters, 3.5 meters on the internal width that you can go. And for example, if you think of a hospitality project or a tiny house that Paolo and Massimo are talking about, then that width is kind of not a limitation, because basically if you think of a hotel room or then you can do a lot with that width. If you think of housing or other forms of let's say an office space or a lecture hall, then that is actually a limitation, and then you have to come up with other solutions. I don't think that modular construction necessarily rules out other types of techniques, and vice versa. So we can use the experience and the kind of like the thinking behind modular construction to modernize traditional construction as well. So I think there's definitely hybrids that can be done. Or for example, in a hotel, you could have hotel rooms that are modular, and then the lobby space is actually in between and is actually the void that is between these models. So I think modular has a space in all types of construction, but there's a limit as to what you can transport, and then we have to come up with clever solutions to deal with that limitation. But I think one of my colleagues was saying that you have to find a balance between sustainability and architecture, or sustainability and modular. But I think the best projects, and the Mountain Refuge is one of them, is actually there seems to be no limitation. Like there's not any compromise on architecture, and modular doesn't need to compromise. It can enhance the experience. So use it wisely, use it where it's good, and if it's not a good solution, then there's other solutions at hand.
Yeah.
But sustainability we can't go around. Like we're on a breaking point with the world. Heating and cooling of buildings has an enormous impact on our energy footprint. 40% of the energy consumption of a building is during construction. So I think architects have a very big role to play, not only in the amount of resources that they use during construction, but also the resources during operations. And as Massimo was saying, Paolo was saying, that what's happening to the afterlife of a building. And if you think of modular construction, it's if its life, or if it's filled its duty, let's say on 30 years on the side of a mountain, one way is to recycle the materials. One other thing is that it's small enough to be lifted up and maybe be transported somewhere else and get a second life. So we should think, like, what are we designing now and what's going to happen in 20 or 30 years?
Well, what's going to happen is really, I think we have to go by steps, because modular architecture, as you said, is very good when you have to build something small now. So if you have to build something really small, then you can go fully modular. You can have no issues with transport, and you can also make a good design. But of course, if you want to make modular architecture become a standard way to build bigger things, for example, real houses, big houses, then I think that we should work more on modular systems. I think we should evolve in that field. I mean, it's not important that we can transport a house on, of course. What's important is that we can minimize the complexity of the processes by studying the project in a way that is conceived in modular, and I mean smart. So maybe you're gonna transport the building split in more parts, but the way you assemble, the way you make the walls, the way you assemble the roof, the way that needs to become less traditional, and we should focus more on systems.
And I think that's a very good point. And of course, throughout time, there's been several systems developed, especially in the 60s. This was a hot topic, and back then it meant standardization. So same length, same columns, same grid structure, etc. And luckily, we are now in an era where basically elements don't have to be the same. We can have the same solutions, but by using modern technology, we can actually customize at the same time. So although the system is the same, the building doesn't need to be the same. So I think where previous systems failed because basically the system was maybe boring, or everything was done with the same rhythm or with the same repetition. Now that limitation is not there anymore, and we can actually use computer designed solutions that have no limitations in space and in size. One thing, of course, that we always have to take into account is if you go really customize, like if you really start to customize stuff, it's like, how would those elements be reused in the future? One way is to use them as a raw material. Let's say wood. Wood can be grind down, and we can use the wood chips to make new materials. Even better, though, would be for nature if we could use the elements as close to how they were manufactured as possible, with as little input of extra energy, etc. So we have to find a balance in there, and probably there's some extreme projects in either direction, and the truth might be somewhere in the middle. I think what these smaller projects show is they show the potential of modular construction and really the way forward. Most of the building square meters are, of course, in medium rise developments. So if we can use part of this technology and part of this knowledge and tackle the medium high rise construction, then we really have we really get to some numbers that have an impact on the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Willem, just before we proceed any further, our interpreter is suffering a bit, so if you can slow down. Thank you.
Okay, I'll talk slower. I'll leave some gaps in the story.
Thanks. So, I mean, given everything that you're saying, and given that we are seeing more and more common, we are seeing it more modular architecture in terms of design when it comes to the design world. And you go to all these design magazines and things, and you see all these new concepts, but a lot of them are not really visualized. And I want to know, what do you think is stopping clients from taking on such projects? Do you see that it's quite less when it comes to the construction world? Is it still an issue, or?
Yeah, it's not too often that a client comes to us and says we want to model a building. People want a getaway, or people want a hotel, or people want a new house, or an elderly home. So those are the requests that come to us, and I think then it's up to the architect to decide what's the right way forward, not only with the customer in mind, but also with the future in mind, and choose the right building technology. Yeah, I think that it's up to the architect in the way to decide, and it's a means of construction. It's not that that's the main selling point. Like, for example, Space of Mind or Arctic Treehouse or the Mountain Refuge. It's about experiencing nature there, and the building supports that experience. So it's not so much that it's modular. It's the modular makes it a more sustainable building. The modular makes it maybe possible. In case of Space of Mind, for example, it can be transported by helicopter. That wouldn't be possible if it wasn't modular. So it allows for an enhanced experience, but it's not the ultimate goal that it's modular. The ultimate goal is, of course, the user of the building and future generations to leave a world that is a bit better than what it was now.
See, that's true, but do you see that, for example, yes, if you're talking about hospitality sector, the client is usually private investor, let's say. But is it that modular architecture, even when it comes to the government, does it have more limitations? Are there regulations that need to lessen? Like, do you think that there is something else that could be done to make it more popular? And I don't know how is the case in Italy versus.
Well, I would like to make a case that again, not so much to allow for more modular construction, but for more sustainable construction. So a life cycle analysis of a building. So how much energy or energy is used for construction, for operations, and for the life and the lifespan of the building. And if we would either tax the worst versions or incentivize the more sustainable buildings, I think that would be one way for a government to push that forward. I think one other way, of course, like why most modular buildings are actually made out of timber, because it's really relatively light, it's relatively easy to transport, to lift, etc. So the material is already a tenfold better than using concrete, for example, just because cement has to be burned at 1200 degrees. And the amount of energy that goes into the raw material of concrete is tremendous. At the same time, concrete is hard to recycle. So I think it's like modular is a very good way for a big part of the building stock, but sustainable buildings should be the goal. Healthy buildings, durable buildings, and if the governments around the world would incentivize sustainable building, I'm sure that automatically we would see much more modular construction.
So, Paolo, would you like to add to that, or do you agree? Or
I agree, and what I would add to this discussion is to think about the modular architecture, as I said before, as a product. So we can have a couple of key to read this situation. And what I mean is, if we consider the modular architecture as if we consider the modular architecture made by element, this element could be scaled or could be sized in a different way. I mean, for instance, beams, columns can be pre-constructed using a special material like wood. As William said, concrete is impossible to make a modular architecture or sustainable architecture because of the nature of the material. So we need to consider the material and consider the modular architecture made by bricks. So we can call the unity of the modular architecture as bricks, like beams or columns. And then it is important to give to the modular architecture a certain amount of customization. And when I think about the customization, I think about finishing or about small non-structural customization. This idea came to me looking for studying a little bit the market of the cars. So if you think about a really good car on the market, the car has a unique unique chassis, and whatever you can do on a car is just changing the color or changing the material inside. So in my opinion, in the future, in order to get a completely green building and a completely modular building, is considered a building, as I said before, as a product. And we already have a perfect example in the world about a product that works perfectly. So the humanity already invented a car. So let's try to let's try to apply what we did for the industry of the cars to the industry of the architecture. If we can do that, in my opinion, we can. It's a good way to move to a completely green circle and a completely green economy and architecture.
It's super green, but it doesn't serve the ego of architects, maybe. Everyone wants to stand out.
Yeah. Maybe the limitations are such that at the moment the customization would mean, for example, that you can only change non-structural members or, for example, the facade material or the color. But of course, the level of customization by, for example, like building aided design like Rhino or something, like the limits are endless, and CLT, it's such a strong material that basically even the structural members could be adjusted in the future. So I think we're kind of now dipping our toes in this technology, and it will rapidly evolve. The one thing is, of course, that construction industry is like one of the most old-fashioned industries in the way that they are, and it's hyper local. So traditions in let's say Finland are completely different than they are in Italy, than they are in UAE, and but there's also a lot of knowledge in these traditions. So I think we shouldn't like try to completely bypass that, and we should build on tradition. But how can we blend these two, and how can they strengthen each other? I think that's going to be the really interesting part. And I don't think that renders the architect obsolete, but it's buildings, of course, work better in like not all buildings can be transformed from one part of the world to another part of the world. Like just climate, we need cooling in some areas where we need heating in other areas, and there always needs to be kind of some level of customization there to make the building excel also during its operations.
Yes, of course, but in this case, we are fully aware of this. The mountain refuge, for example, is something that has been conceived for the mountains, even the name the mountain refuge. But of course, if someone wants to, if somehow we want to go modular on tiny houses and homes and this category of living, every country, every weather, every environment needs a specific living condition, or vice versa. Every living condition needs a specific way of building. So, but that's not a problem that involves modular architecture. It's an issue that involves making more models, we need to make a standardization based on environmental conditions, of course. And regarding the regulations and current laws, I think it's still way too early, because, for example, here in Italy, there is no regulation at all regarding tiny homes.
Okay.
So it's something that needs to be discussed by the government. I think we believe it's going to take some time to get into the regulations of many countries.
Yeah, but we've, like, if you talk about regulations, what we've had is that, for example, with some of the projects, we had the models manufactured abroad, and then the local authorities, they want to check upon construction and that it's according to the local building standards.
Yes.
And sometimes authorities were willing to travel and visit the factory abroad, but there's also been times that they're not willing to do so. And then you have to kind of leave the walls open or maybe the floor open, then transport them, have the authorities check it, and then finish it off. So depends a little bit on the municipality or the area where you work or the country where you work, if they're willing to make it to make a push for it. Luckily, I think if there's a client who's willing to invest his or her money into a sustainable building, gets the government on their side, because everybody is pushing for this. The EU is pushing for this, but also in the US, in the Middle East, these are hot topics at the moment. So I think when there's a client with ambition, the government is typically willing to help out. But that's a luxury problem at the moment, because there's only a few projects that are truly sustainable. It would be really good if the bulk of construction would be like really a few steps up. And then regulations might have to change.
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's the evolution anyway. We need to consider this as a very important type of construction, of architecture, and it needs to be more adaptable, the system, basically. So we often think of this, especially when designing modular architecture, is that usually it's, Willem, you were saying that it responds to building in remote locations. It's because of extreme site conditions, it is the most sustainable way, and all of these things. But in that sense, is it also self-sustaining? And what happens if a city is not equipped to have self-sustaining buildings? So here in the UAE, for example, we still don't have the luxury of, if we had solar power, we feed back into the grid and all of these elements. So where do you draw the line? Where do you actually
living off-grid is a choice, first of all. But I think it's also very important that in 2021, if you make a modular architecture, tiny homes, tiny cabins, it's very important that you think about living, of course. So yes, we believe it needs to be self-sufficient, self-sustaining. And the product actually we're working now is going to be a fully self-sustaining cabin in terms of electricity, heat, hot water, and waste. So yes, this is a very important aspect, and because if you want to go tiny, if you want to go in tiny homes, tiny cabins, of course, the place in which you are placing this home must not be a limit. This is where tiny homes really become popular and innovative, is that you can actually place them in most places because they are self-sustaining.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Nadja, to respond to your question that like you were asking, like how does it work in cities? And I think there's two ways to it. Like basically, if you think of remote, then as my colleague said, was like off-grid works very well with remote, and that's also where there's not the infrastructure to even have plumbing or find heating or electricity. If you think of the city, like scaling up is, of course, and that's what a city does, sharing infrastructure, sharing the generation of electricity, etc., is also very good. Actually, city dwellers are relatively, of course, depending on the size of the house, but relatively sustainable because they share so much function. They share transportation, they share energy. They might share a laundrette rather than having everything by themselves. And I think, again, modular is one means to making the world more sustainable. And that means both off-grid on remote locations, but I also see an opportunity for modularity in a cityscape, and especially in the life cycle of buildings. So to extend the life cycle, but also to be able to upgrade or change in the future. So I think there's a world for modularity in both conditions, the urban condition and the remote condition. So I wouldn't rule one out over the other. The first step is, of course, easier to off-grid because we discussed like tiny houses, but it's interesting to see how this can also help us in the larger scale.
Yeah. One other thing is that I mean, we didn't really discuss your projects, actually. Maybe if you can run us through, Willem, if you can take us through the Arctic treehouse, technical requirements, how did the design come about?
Yeah, so I think you have some images of maybe it's good to look at three different projects. So Arctic Treehouse Hotel is a resort, actually one of the more high-end resorts in Europe. And let's see, yeah, it's that one. And here we chose modular for many reasons. So of course, efficiency of use of material, but also this is built above the Arctic Circle. Nature is super fragile. Trees grow very, very slow. The covering of the forest is also growing very, very slow. So we wanted to have as minimal construction on site as possible. So modular allowed us to make high-end cabins throughout the winter season and move them to the site in summer. And then at the same time, open the hotel immediately the season afterwards, and immediately have the full experience of nature without having the damage of a typical construction site. And the repetition, of course, also helps with costs. The land use or the soil that we used was placed on top of the roof. So basically the total surface of green area has stayed the same. Then a little bit similar to the mountain refuge is Space of Mind, which is for sale and placed on several locations around the world now. This is a really tiny cabin, off-grid and on-grid, can be transported by helicopter. So here we really try to keep the weight as low as possible to bring that unique experience to challenging locations. In this case, it's standing on the cliff next to the sea, or actually into the archipelago. Then it also allows for unique architecture. So if you go to one page up, this is a prototype that we just finished. And this is a resort that is coming up where we have floating cabins that are half submerged into the land, and then cabins that are standing on one leg like this. So you're either like a bird or like a duck in the lake, or then more like a forest animal that is like on the same level with the ground. If you scroll to one other
positioned on one, basically just have one post.
Yeah, it has one post. The structural engineer didn't like that.
I'm pretty sure. That's why I was very intrigued, because if I mean, the amount of time you hear this is not possible, or
yeah. So we had to come up with some clever solutions. So there's one post that carries the weight, but then we use the entrance stair to stabilize the whole structure. So it's yeah, we use the stair as a second element to stabilize. If you go to the first image, this is a ski resort, and this is actually also going to be modular. And here the models are stacked together. And also form bigger models. So we left interior walls out, and then two models make kind of a bigger unit. And here again, sorry?
Situation. It's more of a high-rise situation rather than...
Yeah, or medium rise. And here's, of course, here we really have square meters that make an impact. And it also really helps with the experience of the interior that it's fully wooden, in this case CLT. Yeah, so this is also modular, and yeah, there's the full range and ways how we can implement modular into architecture.
That's great. So Paolo and Massimo, I mean, the mountain refuge, it's really interesting, and it's really, it's a great solution. What do you foresee that you want to tackle even furthermore, that are probably like limitations now, but maybe with technological advancements? What are your ambitions to achieve with this project? Do you want to make it, I don't know, how do you want to make it even more innovative?
There goes Paolo. You there?
Well, what we want to achieve is trying to transform, as I said before. This is, I think, it's our I mean, good point and strong point. What we want to do is to transform architecture in a product, and what we want to do maybe in the future is make the people make the small tiny houses enough comfortable, enough good to live inside. And the main issue is also the cost, the pricing cost. I mean, we know that if we go maybe traditional, the cost, it depends on the technique, it depends on the culture and tradition. It's going to be costly or not. For sure, the modular architecture right now using timber frame rather than CLT, it has a cost. Just with the big number, we can cut this kind of problem. So in the future, what we want to aim is just to transform a refuge into a place where the young couple or the most weak people can live, and maybe give to the people a good chance to start their life with a small amount of money. This is the main point, in my opinion.
That's great. I mean, that's a very amazing goal, and hopefully you'll come to realize it.
Thank you.
I have a few questions from the audience, but maybe before we go to that, you talk a lot about CLT and about wood construction in particular. What do we do in this part of the world? Do we just prefabricate it wherever, you know, there is timber and transport it? Do you think there's other innovative techniques that we could use here?
For now, I mean, it's up to the transportation cost and to the transportation problem. So what we can do now is just to decentralize the production, maintaining the same standard, the same quality, and the same materials in order to save CO2 and in order to save the money. In the future, I mean, I don't know what kind of technology we can use to transport the entire shelter. But if we can centralize, of course, the production, we can save the money. That we can make more affordable. That, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, CLT is maybe the first renewable product that has gone to like such a scale that it can be used for these. But I definitely see other materials around, like which could like for example, bamboo is one. Rammed earth you could imagine as well. Of course, that's a bit fragile to transport, but you could have a post and beam system that is filled up with rammed earth. So or with hay or straw or and of course modular, like I think one of the questions also saying that modular doesn't mean that it has to be sustainable. You can also make very unsustainable modular buildings. So I mean you could make a concrete model. Yeah, we don't want that, so that's not the point. But of course where our office is located, there's plenty of forest and plenty of wood, so that's been our first choice for these products.
Yeah.
But I don't think wood is the only solution. There's plenty of renewable materials that we can use, and also the requirements are different. For example, like the thermal capacity of a building varies greatly. Like what you're after in the UAE, the thermal capacity of being able to absorb some of the heat is very important, whereas in the Nordic climate, we want a very high U value, and wood has a natural insulative quality. So definitely wood is the first step, but it would be very important for the industry to develop other solutions than CLT.
Okay, so I have a question here. I think, Paolo, since you were referring to architecture turned into a product, would you foresee that your design is ordered online, design delivered, and 3D printed on site?
Yes.
In the future?
Yes. I mean, what we are doing now is just so also in that case. On that aspect, we are trying to change the market in this way.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a website, so the client can contact directly us, and according to the place, I mean, according to the location of the client, we will send the request to the supplier in that part of the world. So basically, if you want to buy a mountain refuge, you can go to the website, click, make the payment, and decide the date, and everything will be delivered on that site.
Let's hope to live to see that. So, and well, again, Willem, talking about CLT construction, what are the regulations with CLT? Like currently in the UAE, it's not an approved method of construction. I'm not sure if you would know how long you think it will take to be regulated, but what are the current regulations?
Yeah, so CLT, you can see that it's being certified in more countries. Of course, the wood producing countries were the first ones to certify because that's where the highest volume lays, but I'm sure it will move to other countries as well. Of course, wood or CLT and wood in general has some challenges with fire. And not so much that the building wouldn't stand. So actually wood is pretty good in fires for structural integrity. It's more about escape and that it creates smoke and sparks. So a safe escape is very important. And CLT, I would say in the UAE, if it's not allowed yet, it will be very soon in low rise. The main challenge is in the fire regulations in most countries. So how to build safely in medium high rise without the need for example, sprinkler or covering all the CLT up with gypsum boards to make it safe. But CLT is a serious contender for concrete, and it has the same structural qualities as concrete has, but it's faster, it's renewable, it stores CO2. So sooner or later, I'm pretty sure that every market will want to use the benefits of CLT. Or massive timber. CLT is just one way of doing massive timber.
Yeah.
Massive timber.
Yeah, hopefully as well. Again, because we don't have it here, you think a question that you often have is it more sustainable to transport, logistics also?
Yeah. Look, Logistics are a problem, of course, but relatively the amount of energy that goes into transportation of, for example, CLT versus the amount of energy that is required to make concrete, it's minimal. So transport, even if you would ship it from one part of the world to the other side of the world, would still be a much more valuable solution than concrete would be.
Yeah.
And also steel, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, steel's a bit better because it's easier to reuse. So it's easy to recycle. The same goes for aluminium, but concrete, it basically you can use it as kind of a filler under the road or something like that. But that's not very, for something that took that much energy to manufacture. It's really a pity that it's in its second life is going to be reduced to fill, basically.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this has been very, very interesting, and I really, I'm looking forward to seeing more and more of these, the architecture, the construction method, all of these things. And thank you for all your feedback and the great work that you have been doing. Is there anything you would like to add as we are wrapping up our session?
Yeah, I think it's been, thanks for having us, and it's been really nice to see like inspirational projects from all around the world that are experimenting with this, like basically architecture as a product, but also new ways of manufacturing. And I think there's huge leaps to be made in the construction industry, and these are maybe some of the first examples of that. But I'm really like, we're in a changing point in our industry, and let's participate for the better.
Yeah. Paolo?
What I can add is just, I mean, I really hope that what we discussed today, it will be something that the people can think about, and I mean, we need to take some decision right now, the future of the planet. So this is a really key point in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely our responsibility. Yeah. Massimo?
Yeah, I totally agree. Although it's quite early to say that, but it's our responsibility to provide sustainable ways to proceed in the construction industry for the next 100 years, for example. Everything's changed in the past, and no one ever said that something would change. For example, 500 years ago, we were used to build in a certain way. If you go in, for example, I am Italian, if you go in our Italian cities, you can see that. Now it's totally impossible to do that. Not only it's way expensive and not sustainable at all to build like 500 years ago, but even people, artisans, are unable to do that. No one can do that anymore. This is a real problem. Times change. The future is different. So we have to change we have to intercept what's happening now and what's going to happen in, for example, 50 years. And we need to take into consideration that it's going to change again. So now we have reached a level of, it's very easy to build, but we have to make a step further more. And we need to make this sustainable because population is increasing. Everything is increasing. Of course, we have to keep that in mind. And everyone can do their bit, but we as designers can do our bit. And it's very important, in my opinion.
Definitely. And if I mean, the time, just like you said, the time, it changes, and we need to change.
It's gonna change again now. In a few decades, it's gonna change again, everything.
Yeah.
So we need to think about it, and we need to find solutions that allows our people and the planet to work in a sustainable way. I don't know if modular is the answer, but it's surely a step forward.
Yeah.
It will be part of the answer.
Yeah, and you're willing to explore. Everyone is at least doing their part, just like you said, doing their bit by trying different things and new things, and then it's a trial and error process.
Yeah, modular at the moment, it answers a question and it solves a problem. So let's see how it goes. We are going to be dedicated to our design, to our project, and we want to give our best. So let's see how it goes.
Well, good luck to all of you, and we're probably going to hear more of you with time, I'm pretty sure. So, yeah, well.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us. And sincere apologies for the followers, because I now see all the messages from the interpreter that I was talking far too fast. So I didn't look at it, but I'm really sorry. I can, if somebody has a question, send me an email.
Just being a native speaker, don't worry about that.
It's fine. I'm pretty sure he's okay. He can. So thank you all. Thank you, Willem, Massimo, and Paolo, and thank you for letting us know about all the possibilities that modular architecture brings, and how it is opening more doors to even more and more innovative construction methods, as you were saying, with time. So on behalf of myself, for our panelists, and on behalf of Shuruq, I'd like to thank each and every one of you that joined us tonight. Thank you so much. And our final session would be taking place in 2 weeks' time. And we're going to talk about the future of materiality, 3D printing, robotics, and much more. So stay tuned. Goodbye, everyone, and stay safe. Bye.
Bye.
Everyone. Thank